I'm Katy Koontz, the editor of Unity Magazine, and I am here this morning with Reverend Charline Manuel, who is the chair of the Unity World Headquarters Board of Directors, and also with Reverend Sylvia Sumter, who is chair of the Unity Worldwide Ministries Board of Trustees. And this is a historic moment for Unity. Reverend Charline is the first African American chair of the Unity World Headquarters. She was elected in 2022, last year, and Reverend Sylvia was elected this year in 2023. So that means this is the first time that both chairs of Unity World Headquarters and Unity Worldwide Ministries have been African Americans, let alone African American women. So I could be here all day talking about all of their accomplishments, but I want to go over just some of the highlights. Reverend Charline Manuel was born in Detroit. She has 2 Bachelor's of Arts degrees, one in sociology and one in urban studies, and a master's degree in human resources management. She was ordained a Unity minister in 1995, and she served as the senior minister at the Unity Center for Miami for 22 years, and has been a faculty member of the Unity Urban Ministerial School since 2012. She's the founder and CEO of One Accord Strategies, where she leads board trainings for faith-based organizations. Reverend Charline is also on the Board of Trustees for the Parliament of the World's Religions, where we are today, and she was a presenter at both the 2018 Parliament in Toronto, as well as the 2023 Parliament in Chicago. Her social action work includes leading initiatives for clean water in Africa, partnering to build a school in Haiti, and receiving peace training in Costa Rica. Reverend Sylvia was born in Brooklyn, New York. She has a Bachelor of Arts degree in psychology, a master's degree in education, and she also has an associate's degree in business administration. She was licensed as a Unity minister in 1986 and ordained in 1987. And she was a leader at the Unity School of Religious Studies, as it was known at the time, at Unity Village, both as a member of the faculty and as an administrator. She's the senior minister of Unity of Washington, D.C., and has been since 1991. And previously, she also served on the Unity World Headquarters Board of Directors for 2 terms. She previously worked in higher education as a professional counselor, as well as the director of the Higher Education Opportunity Program at Onondaga Community College in Syracuse, New York, and as assistant director of that program at Syracuse University. She spearheads the national movement Stand Up for Humanity, which works to raise the collective consciousness by honoring and taking a stand for all people. And she's a member of the Evolutionary Leaders Circle, which is a group of cutting-edge thought leaders from diverse disciplines who come together in synergy to help support a shift in consciousness. I wanted to start out our discussion today by asking you to go back in time and tell us how you discovered Unity.
Well, I think Unity eventually discovered me and just kept following me around. That's what I really think. My mother, and I was maybe in my teens, discovered the Daily Word, and she would order all these books from Unity, and she tried to get me to read them. Of course, I wasn't interested. It sounded like a bunch of religious mumbo jumbo. And in my teens, I wanted to run as far away from anything that hinted of religion, because we grew up in a more traditional church, I'll just say. And I did not believe those teachings as a young girl. So what was in my mind was, as soon as I'm 18, run as far away from religion as I could, because my mother made us go to church every Sunday, in a church when I had no belief in what they were talking about. I just didn't believe. And I didn't like the picture they had of Jesus on the cross there, and I thought, why would they do that to him? It's like, so I ran as far away as I could. But the point is, my mother started reading Unity material, and she'd leave it around. She'd try to force it on me. I didn't want to do it. And then she started to go to a Unity church, and I was her driver. I got my license, and the only place she would let me drive was to drive her to church. So I was, okay, if that's the only way I can drive, I'll take you to the Unity church. And I did, and I sat in church with her a couple times, and I went to sleep, and you know, we didn't have cell phones then, but if you can imagine, if I had a cell phone, I would have been one of those people sitting in the sanctuary on my cell phone because I was listening to this guy. His name was David Williamson. And I just couldn't get into the message. No how, no way. But a series of events, you know, eventually led me to where I am now. But that was my first introduction, and that was my earliest memory. It took a lot of years after that of unity just kind of coming along, and I finally surrendered and like, okay. I'll say more about that later, maybe.
Thank you.
Well, I am a product of the 60s. And that was the time when, you know, there was a book called I'm Okay, You're Okay. Everybody was okay. And we were learning how to meditate. And so I had taken a meditation course and was practicing. And I used to go down to the Village in New York City. And there was a woman who was a reflexologist. And she was well known, an older woman who would massage your feet, but she would espouse these wonderful teachings, right? And I didn't know what it was about. And then she was a religious science practitioner, but I had no idea what that meant. I just know that every Saturday I'd go sit at her feet while she worked on my feet. And then one day she said to me, "You need to go hear Eric Butterworth." And I was like, well, okay, because if she said something, I was really, you know, hanging on her every word. She said he was a minister down in Manhattan, and I worked in Manhattan, a block away from where the center was, Unity Center. And so I went to hear this person that she recommended named Reverend Eric Butterworth. And of course, the moment I, you know, listened to him, I was just hooked. And since I worked one block from the original center before he went to Lincoln Center. He had a center on 50th Street. I would go every day. He'd have a Tuesday lecture, and then they had a meditation every evening. So I would go to the meditations every evening, and I'd go to the Tuesday afternoon lectures. That was my lunch, and then I started going on Sundays. And it was just very, very powerful, and I knew that I was home. I didn't understand the language at first, but I knew this was for me because I loved his mind and his thinking. He was just the perfect, you know, minister for me. And I stopped back in the 70s, maybe like around 1972 or 3. And that kind of started me on my journey.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
So how were you each called to Unity Ministry, and what were your initial goals as a minister?
Well, maybe I'll pick up on that because it was a number of years, about maybe 4 years in, after listening to Eric, and it was one Sunday, and I was watching him, and I heard myself say, you know, I could do that. And then I literally heard a voice within my own being say, you will do that. And I was sort of startled, and I was like, where did that come from? And then I spent the next 8 years running from that notion, that thought, that feeling, that intuition, that still small voice, until I couldn't run anymore. I was just tired, and I had to just surrender. But in the process, because I had not seen any female ministers at the time, this was in the early 70s, and you know, the explosion of women in ministry had not yet happened. And I was looking and searching for a role model or someone to tell me that what I heard within my own being and in my own soul was actually true. Because, you know, representation does matter. So I was looking around. Eric's wife, Olga Butterworth, she led the meditations, but I had not seen in any tradition, even in my own tradition, female ministers or pastors. So it was quite a journey, but I knew the call was true. And as I said, I tried to run from it, but everywhere I ran, Spirit was even having people come up to me on the street, and they would say, "Are you a minister?" And I'd go, "No, why?" You know. Until finally, I just had to say, "Well, you know, I think I need to pursue this path." So that was my calling.
Beautiful, beautiful.
Yeah.
Thanks.
I, very similar, certainly came to ministry kicking and screaming. In fact, even in my first year of ministerial school, I kept saying, I don't even want to be a minister. I'm just here. I want to learn these principles. I love studying. I love learning. And I just wanted to learn about the unity teachings, but I didn't really want to be a minister. I actually got to that point purely out of curiosity. So I'd had a couple of experiences. My mother, as I said, had introduced me to the Unity materials, but I had a series of little breadcrumbs on the path. At a job, I was working for the city of Detroit, and one of my co-workers, she went to the Unity Church, which was Ruth Mosley's church, and every morning she would leave a copy of the Daily Word on my desk. And I would give it back to her, not even reading it, and I would say, I already know about the Daily Word. My mother reads the Daily Word. I don't need the Daily Word. Stop putting your Daily Word on my desk. She kept on doing it. Daily Word, Daily Word, Daily Word. Finally, I said, okay, just maybe to get her to leave me alone. I said, okay, I'll open it up and I'll read it. So I read it one day. I thought, well, this is interesting. So gave it back to her. I said, I did read it today. She gave it next day. I said, let me try it again. This is interesting. And then I was going through a really tough time. I was actually going through a divorce. And I came to work one day. I must have looked like somebody pulled me out of a place where I hadn't had sleep. My hair was probably everywhere. And she wasn't at work. And I'm like, where's my Daily Word? This is the day I need the Daily Word, and she's not here. So when she came back the next day, I let her have it. I said, you weren't here yesterday, and I needed the Daily Word. So she said, there's a church. I was like, I don't really do church. She said, well, just come one time. So I did. I went to Westside Unity Church, Ruth Mosley. I sat in the very back because I thought, if I don't like it, I'll sneak out, nobody will notice. But I sat in the back, and Ruth Mosley spoke exactly to me. And I'm thinking, okay, how did she do that? She knew exactly where I was and exactly what I was going through. And so I thought, okay, I'm going to come back next week. I'm going to put this lady to the test. Let's see if she really knows her stuff. I'm going to come back next week. So I came back the next week, and I moved one row up. And I was like, wow, how did she do that again? She's speaking exactly to me. Third week, moved another seat up. And then she said one day, if you will learn these principles, if you will live your life by these principles, your life will change. And I thought, they're principles? Oh. The Sunday after that, I was sitting on the front row. I had a notebook, I had a pen in hand, and I'm like, okay, lady, go. So it started for me in that way, but it was a series of events even after that I found myself going through difficult times, read, and I actually wrote an article about this for Unity Magazine years ago when my mother gave me Open Your Mind to Prosperity. And I read the book, and in 6 months, truly my life had changed totally, completely. But what struck me was I was just curious how you could read this material. And in the case of the Open Your Mind to Prosperity, I did this treasure map. And in 6 months, everything I had put on that treasure map, it had manifested in my life. And that just struck me. I wanted to understand, how does that happen? So my journey really came into being purely out of curiosity. I wanted to know more. And then, of course, eventually, like you, a couple of people would say, I actually, here's a story. So I ended up really wanting to study more, moved to Kansas City, thinking I would take some, they were called CEP classes back then. I moved to Kansas City from Detroit just to take more classes because I was curious. And my first instructor was Sylvia Sumter.
Wow.
No kidding.
No kidding. She was my communications instructor, my first time taking CEP classes, because I was on this curious journey to figure out unity. And this lady right here, and after taking her class, I thought, man, that was good. And again, that was just another step, another step, another step. And since I was there in Kansas City and more people came up to me, like you were saying, are you a minister? No. I just loved hanging out at Unity Village and loved learning stuff. And people thought I was a minister. I'm not. I'm just here to learn stuff. And next thing I know, I'm in the ministerial program, and then I'm a minister. I just wanted to learn the principles. That's all. That was my goal. Who knew?
Who knew? Wow. And it was a long journey getting there too, from where I was. And my first time going to Unity Village was after I had gotten my call. I thought, well, you're asking me, you're telling me I'm going to do that. I don't see any women ministers. And I said, well, let me just go discover this Unity business a little further, because all I knew was Eric Butterworth and the Unity Center in New York. So I went to, they had a retreat, and I went to the retreat, and I said, I'm just going to check everything out. I'm going to see what's here, in the Midwest and whatever. And Sally Taylor was the only African American on the faculty then. And so I said, oh, because I'm looking for women, because I didn't know that women could be ministers. And so when I saw Sally, I was like, okay, there's a sister here, let me go up. And, that's a whole nother long story, but I ended up, at least saying that if she could do it, then wow, then maybe this is okay for me to feel like I'm being called to it. And then I served on the faculty, and as soon as I got on the faculty, she left, and she said to me, now that you're here, I can go. And she left, and then I became the only African American female faculty person, and I stayed. And when I left, there was a gentleman who came after me, it was Maurice and Mustafa, and I said, well, now that you guys are here, I can leave. And so, but I happened to be there. I stayed, I went to school, and they said, well, why don't you stay on the faculty? And I was like, well, I think I'm supposed to get a church. And but then I said, okay, let me stay and teach. And that was I loved it because I got to meet, all the students who came for CEP, SEE, whatever it was called. We were always changing. But I'll say this, that the moment an African American came, I was happy because I was very much alone on the faculty. They only had one other, and this may be too much, but they only had one other African American. It was Frida Williams, yes, and she was the librarian. Yeah. And so it was she and myself, and they had one more African American gentleman who worked in the prayer room. And there were no other African Americans on the grounds. I lived on the grounds for a minute, and then I had my own apartment, and it was just, sort of isolating and lonely. And so whenever an African American student came for SEE, I was like, oh, how are you? Who are you? Where are you? It was like just, just to feel comfortable. And I do remember she was an excellent student and speaker. So anyway, I just wanted to throw that in as well.
Well, let me just say this though. Thank you. I don't know if I've ever said that to you, but thank you for being there. When I arrived on the grounds, you're absolutely right. There weren't a lot of people that looked like us. But then when I walked in that classroom and I saw you as the instructor, I thought, wow, this is awesome. So thank you for being there. I don't know how that would have changed my perception of, is this something for me to pursue? But I'm really glad that you were there. Well, thank you.
Thank you. We all do our parts.
Yes.
What were some of the most notable challenges that you overcame along the way on your leadership path?
So on your leadership path. So now I'm thinking, I'm in ministry now?
Mm-hmm.
Oh boy, how long is this interview? I wrote a whole book. It's called The Power of One Accord. I wrote a whole book on the challenges of ministry for me and getting my board to a place where we could function of one accord and actually get things done. It was my first, my first 2 years in ministry, I think 2.5 years, the board that hired me wanted to fire me. Well, they kind of sort of did fire me, but then the congregation hired me right back in the same moment. So that was a challenge. But I will say that, going through the ministerial program, I mean, there's only so much you can be prepared for. And then you just got to get out there and trust Spirit. And for me, what I know now looking back is to stay grounded in truth.
Yes.
Trust the presence of God within, and then be absolutely committed to being in integrity.
Yes.
That is what has guided me every step of the way, to have my own integrity check. Am I being who I say I am? And am I demonstrating that from a place of knowing that I have been divinely appointed to be here, that I am divinely prepared to follow Spirit, that I am divinely appointed in this moment to be the best Charline that I can be. And when I have to, sometimes I have to do that check, and then I have to do have to do a girlfriend check. It's like, girlfriend, I think you're stepping out of line. And then I got to work to get myself back in that place. But for me, it's always remembering, why am I here? And I have asked myself that many times. Why am I here? And it was Spirit invited me into this space. And I always, and there's actually a scripture, and I don't really know what it is, but it always points to God never gives you more than you can handle. That. And I reflect on that and say, if this is mine to do, there's a way that it can be done. And I need to be in integrity every step of the way, and be grounded in this truth that I know works. It took me a long time to accept that these unity principles, once I discovered them, once I really decided that I was going to live by them, they saved my life. So if I stay grounded in that, I'm okay. I'm okay. Yeah, I'm good, in fact.
Yeah. Yes. So I'm going to start with my first ministry, and so far my last one. But back in the day, as I was a faculty member, each graduating class would take a trip into the field. And this year wasn't my year to go, but it was Frank Judici, who was the Bible instructor and staff member. And he sort of knew that I was sort of toying. It was about 5 years into my being a faculty member, but I kept feeling that Spirit had me, to enter into ministry, that I need to perhaps take a church to see if this thing was my true path. I know I could teach, but I wanted to see the experience through of being a minister. And so he was the faculty. He came back from the Washington, D.C. trip, and he says, I don't want you to go, but I think there's the perfect church for you. And the minister there is getting on in age. She's in her 80s. And I know that this is your place. And so I said, oh, well, I'm not too sure. I had heard certain things about the church, through and I thought, I'm not sure. He says, look, I've talked to the board president. Just give her a call and see. So I called her, and I loved her spirit. She was so warm, and I said, okay. She says, well, just send in, an application. So I did, with a little hesitation, reservation, but I did. And they invited me out to come and speak and whatever. And it was a wonderful experience. I loved the community. I just felt, okay, I'll give this a shot in terms of considering it. But also when I went to look at certain parts of the church, it needed a lot of work. And I was sort of like, are you sure this is the place, Spirit? And I don't think you mean for me to kind of come here. And so I went into prayer when I got back. And in my prayer, I was guided to a particular scripture in the Old Testament, and it was God telling the prophet Elias that he was to help Moses lead the people into the promised land. And I was like, And after reading that, I thought, well, maybe I'm called to be of assistance and to help here. So I accepted the position. Wonderful position. The church at that time was fully integrated, but I would say maybe the ratio was like maybe 60-40 or something like that. 60% Caucasian, 40% African American, beautiful choir, wonderful experience. And then I was hired, of course, to speak and to assist the minister, give whatever help I could do. As time would have it, I think sort of the minister may have felt that she was being replaced, but she wasn't. But I was there to assist. But things did not go well because after a while people would call the church and they would ask, well, when is Reverend Sylvia speaking? And I had the Wednesday night, and again, nothing of my own doing. It was just a natural unfolding or whatever. And I think that kind of sort of unearthed and unnerved this wonderful soul. And I'm at the point where I could really honestly say wonderful soul. That was a transition for me to be able to do that, because from then on, I was literally put through hell. And I would say, I said it was a baptism by fire. And I had to question, Lord, why did you, bring me here? And the answer was, I was called here. And at that point, I made the commitment that I was going to see that process through no matter what. There was a call to fire me, to fire the board, the entire board, and everybody, the board was in support because everything was done decently and in order, but it was just a soul who was feeling a little threatened. And so oddly enough, during that same time, I had also gotten a call to accept leadership for Unity of Detroit.
Oh.
Maybe you didn't know that. And I was torn, because it would have been very easy for me to leave all of that dissension and commotion and just go take a church in Detroit. But my heart felt I was called to stay there, to learn the lesson, and to see, and I made a commitment, I was going to see this process through, standing on integrity, standing on my principles, knowing the board and myself did nothing wrong. And so I made the decision to remain there, not knowing whether I would, at the end, whether I would have a job or not have a job. But it was excruciating because I've given my life to this movement, had a wonderful reputation. And watching, what was sad for me was watching, it did not start off as a racial incident. That's not what the issue was. But by the time the process evolved, I could watch the church literally splitting between the majority, even though the majority of the people understood that this beautiful soul was just really kind of threatened and was not necessarily being in a truthful state, but they sided with her. And the African American community sided with me with small percentages on each side. So they had a few African Americans who sided with them, and I had a few Caucasians. But it went and it split down racial lines, which absolutely broke my heart, because that was not the issue. And there were letters back and forth, and I decided I wasn't going to engage. I wrote one letter to the congregation to remind them of our truth principles. I came in love. I didn't, attack the minister. I just understood, but I wanted them to stand on their principles of unity and spiritual principles of love. And we had to call in representation from headquarters. Mm-hmm. And when that process went down, I was told, we know that she's not, doing the right thing, and that this is right, but can you just let it be and just let her, let's let her do this? And I was sort of, that broke my heart as well, because it's like, well, I taught at the Village. I knew all these people. You know who I am. You know my reputation. Yes, we know that this is not you, but why are you asking me to accept something that was not right? Yeah. The bottom line is, I was so hurt and disappointed that the leadership from my movement, who knew me, who I worked with, did not come out in support. They wanted me to just be silent and to let it go. They were going to give her a reprimand and to let that be. Well, unfortunately, the church ended up splitting, and it split where the majority of the people, Caucasian people, left the church, and because the way the bylaws were written, they had to have a certain number of people to throw an entire, but you can't throw a board out. You can't fire the minister, but you certainly can't fire all the board members. And so the church split, and it got very, ugly. And I was just soul wounded. This is my first venture out into ministry, and this was my experience. However, I stayed true to my integrity in terms of what were my principles. I wasn't going to retaliate. I wasn't going to go outside of my own integrity. I was going to stand in my truth no matter what. And when the church split, that it was April 24th, and I remember the entire majority of congregation of Caucasian members got up out of the church and they walked out. The remaining persons were African American and a few Caucasians. And I remember one woman coming up to me and she said, "What are we going to do now?" And I remember saying, "We're going to do church." I went home and I asked the question, "Lord, what am I going to do now?" And these were the words, and they are part of my mission statement to this very day, after being there for 30-something years. Spirit said, "You are to build spiritual consciousness and spiritual community." And that has been my drive and my motivation. I'm there to build spiritual consciousness, to help people remember the truth, to stand on the truth, to live in the truth, no matter how hard it may be in the midst of the storm and the commotion. If you stay true, as you mentioned, if you stay true to your principles of truth, you will survive. And then to build spiritual community, to be a community of openness. And I think in my 33 years being there, we have done that. We built a welcoming and a loving community. We doubled in size and doubled in our funds, and I was able to apply my spiritual principles, my prosperity principles, get to work. And I put my head down and I said, "Okay, God, let's go." And unfortunately, and fortunately perhaps, but what I did, because of my woundedness, I decided I needed to step away, not from the movement. I was an ordained unity minister. That never changed. But because of the experience and the lack of support that I felt, that people would come to me and say, "We know this is not right, but we want you to stand in the wrongness of it so that we could let her, due to her age or whatever it was." And I just felt very much sort of abandoned, and it's like, no, I you know what, that's fine. I'm going to do my thing. And from that point on, I put my head down and I went to work. And I took my ministry and I built it to where it is today, a thriving, ministry that, I never stopped supporting my movements. We're one of the churches that gives a lot. We've given over $1 million to Unity Worldwide Ministries and to Unity World Headquarters. I said we will follow principle. We're going to continue. This is my home. These are our home organizations. I put my head down and I just went to work, and I didn't go to any of the meetings and all of that things because I just felt hurt. But I'll tell you how I got back in. It was Rosemary Fillmore Ray. And they were looking for people to serve on the board. And when I worked at the Village, Rosemary and I had become good friends. Her office was across from mine, and we would talk all the time. And Rosemary sometimes felt like she was a little bit of an outcast, if you know the history. But anyway, I loved her spirit. We became good friends. And one day, I got a call from Rosemary, and she said, "We're looking for someone to serve on UWH's board at the time." And I was like, "Rosemary, I'm not interested. I'm doing my thing." She says, I know, but I want you to come. I think this would be really good." And I'm saying, no. I don't want to jump back into that river. But because I loved her and I understood her commitment to the movement, I said, okay, for you, how can you turn down Rosemary Phil-Moray?
Yeah, really.
Right?
Yeah.
So I said, okay. And that was my entry back into leadership in Unity Ministry. So long story, but that was it.
That's a great, powerful story.
It's very powerful. Yeah, yes.
Both of you, very powerful stories. What were your most important goals and achievements as board members? And I want to say here that Reverend Charline was on the board for 7 years before being elected chair. And Reverend Sylvia was on the board for 5 years before being elected chair. So what have been your most important goals and achievements as board members?
Well, it didn't really start out as a goal for me. When I was elected to the board, and that was 2016, I believe, didn't really know what to expect. I thought, hey, I love Unity. I was asked by someone who I respect, Reverend Pat Williamson, called me and said, hey, they want you to serve on the board. And they said, you're on the board? If you're on the board, you think it's okay? Okay, I'll come. So I was elected to the board with no particular agenda in mind. However, at my first board meeting, I had a shocking realization, and that then became what seems to be my work to do. I was sitting in a board meeting, and the executive team was invited into the space, and we were in the, used to be the inn, now it's something different now, Building 100 or something. And we were having lunch. Lunch was being served to us. And there were maybe 20 of us in the room, and I was the only black person in the room. Until the wait staff came in. And then the wait staff was all black. And I just didn't like the dynamic. I didn't like the look, the feel, and the tone of it. This is at my first board meeting. So I had to bring it up. My instructions from a few ministers who said, at your first couple of board meetings, just go, listen, learn, don't say a whole lot, learn the lay of the land. I thought, I'll do that. But now I'm sitting here and I'm just watching the room. And I'm like, no, I've got to ask the question. And I turned to the CEO at the time, and it was before Jim Blake, and I said to her, do you see this room? Do you really see this room? And she was like, yeah. I said, no, do you really see this room? I said, I am the only person of color besides the wait staff. I said, I'm telling you this, I will not be, and excuse me for my total honesty, I will not be your spook sitting by the door. I will not. This has to change. This is not the times that we live in. This cannot stay. So I think from that point, I kind of became sort of a troublemaker kind of person on the board, I think, anyway. But then that became my work. It's like, this has to change. This can't stand. Then when Jim came, I said, look, I got to be honest with you. This is what it is. It can't stay this way. And if you're willing to work on changing this, you have my support. Otherwise, I don't know if this is going to go so good for both of us. And bless his heart, he was like, no, I agree with you. It needs to change. And he said, if you'll work with me, we'll get it done. I was like, well, let's go to work then. Great. And so that really has become, it wasn't my intention coming on the board that, I'm going to come on the board and there are going to be more black people on the board, and more people of color on the campus, because when you walked the campus back in those days, you didn't see a lot of people that looked like us. And Jim was very committed and sincere, and I believed what he said. And so that then became the role that I kind of just took on because I was the one saying, okay, we've got to get some diversity in here. We've got to get some diversity. And at every meeting, I'm raising the question till even in my first year, they were talking about tearing down the Johnny Coleman cottage. And I was outraged. I'm like, how can you do that? So one of the board members said, well, have you actually been inside the cottage? And I had. He took me over. He had the facilities guy take us in there. And it hadn't been cared for and lived in many years. And they were like, we have to tear it down. I'm like, no, you will not tear this down. Because what it felt like to me is now we're going to erase our history. And I'm like, you can't just erase that, because that is an important part that indicates why we're here this way now. Johnny Coleman, and that's interesting what you said, only 2 students in the class per class, but then Johnny not being able to live on the grounds, and then by your time you had to live on the grounds for your safety, because if you went off those grounds, you might have been in danger. And Johnny's, she couldn't live on the grounds. Like, oh, what's going on here? Are we in? Are we out? Let's figure this out. So, to get to this point, it felt to me like we were really going to erase some important history that we needed to remember. We needed to remember from whence we came, and then make a conscious decision to shift the consciousness into the direction that we know is right and true and for the good of this movement and the world, and for the world. So that really became my charge. And so when I was elected chair, for me, that was sort of a exclamation point on the work that I had done, because Sandra Campbell then came on the board after that, and after Sandra, there was, now we have James Parker. But so now, I will be terming off the board, and now I kind of feel like, okay, so they're in place, so I can go now. I've done my 2 cents of work here, and now I can go now. And so being chair on this is what my final year on the board, it didn't really hit me after the election was taken. It didn't really hit me. And then Jim spoke up in the meeting and he said, wait, this is historic. He says, I think you're the first African American, the first person of color to be chair. And I said, really? It just hadn't computed in my mind yet. And then he said that. He said, I'm pretty sure. So he called Mark and said, check the archives and find out. And then Mark came back and said, yeah, you're the first. And I was like, whoa. And I'm not a crier. It takes a serious Hallmark movie to make me cry. I mean, a serious Hallmark movie. But, tears just started to come. And I wasn't sure where they were coming from, but to be the first. And it was like you were saying, you were there, and how you felt being isolated, but you stayed. And then I come along, and you're my light. You're my light. So now I can see. And so then what that said to me is, maybe I'm somebody's light. So they can see this leadership role is not only possible, it's happening.
Yeah. And that's so weird, because that is one of the reasons, well, being on UWH's board, but on this one, it was to affect the ministries. And I felt, yeah, there's work still to be done. And even though I have a full-time church, I have, my wonderful, sweet mother I care for, I've got lots of other committees and programs that I'm on, I felt, no, but this has to happen. I need to step in here, because we are at such a critical juncture, not only in our movement, but in our world.
Yes.
Where, as I said before, representation matters. And for people to see what is possible matters. And for souls who are committed to staying the course, committed to principle matters. And for programs and organizations to stand on their principles matters. And, having been a Unity minister now, probably going on 50 years or so, not a minister, but in Unity per se, over 50 years, these principles matter. And I think that we have work to do. So I didn't really necessarily come on with a particular agenda, but I also know that my being here itself represents a path forward, and that through the unveiling of, wow, we lived through the George Floyd incident, and that's how we gathered together as 12 ministers who were committed to making sure that our movement that we all love is able to really rise to the occasion and to live out the principles that we say we espouse. And so first I want to thank you for making sure that the history and the legacy of Johnny Coleman and Ruth Mosey, those who came even before me, way before me, that they live on, because it's our history in terms of the movement. So I want to thank you for championing that effort. But for me, what I see is, all I knew was that I was going to be a voice who was willing to speak truth to power. And that I'd had a long history with this movement, and I've seen a lot. I've seen us grow. I've seen us, from the days of when we were the Association of Unity Churches, and I was on the staff, and I could see and hear stuff that went down that did not sit well with my soul. But I've also seen us try to make better strides and moving towards living out our principles. And so at this point in time, I think the work was started to bring a little bit more diversity into our movement, but into our churches. I'm affiliated with the Unity Worldwide Ministries. So what is happening in the ministries? And the ministries look for guidance and leadership. On the board, we were trying to have an opportunity to discuss more diversity. As a board, we went through the book White Fragility, and that was a hard process, because I could see even on the board, these are established Unity ministers, and they were struggling with the concepts. And so we were not, it was myself and Reverend Paulette as the keeper of the flame, just watching the dynamic of trying to bring that. And if the board was struggling a bit, what must our ministries be doing? And so as things happen, when something occurs, there's a lot of excitement around it, and people want to do, but as time fades on, so there was a commitment to make, diversity one of our main initiatives of Unity Worldwide Ministries. But over the time, I could see where that has waned a bit. It's important, but it's not really at the forefront. And that was one that we chose to be one of our number one initiatives. And so for me, it's, can we really see that through? When the times and the issues settle down and people go back into their places, of quote unquote normalcy, then the main issues die. And so I'm very proud to be a part of a group of African American ministers, 12 of us, who have made a commitment to support one another in this work and in our movement, because we are in the movement, part of the movement. But I would love to see our churches really embrace what it means to have unity within unity, and not from a place of condemnation or accusation or any of that, but from us coming together, living our principles, really welcoming. And I always say in my church, everybody is welcomed in my ministry. I only have one requirement, and that is that you come in love. And if you come into that space displaying anything other than love, this is not the place for you. And I don't even have to say anything, because the people will feel this is not the place for me, and they will leave on their own. So, I've learned that I would like every Unity church in our movement to be such that any soul, any sojourner on this path can enter into a unity church and feel absolutely, totally welcomed and seen and valued as a part of that church and that ministry. You know, not as a person of color, but because of who they are, every soul. And that means we have to maybe do some hard work to confront where do we perhaps unwittingly create an environment that is not as welcoming as it should be. And again, nothing is intentional. Maybe in some little odd cases, but for the most part, I trust my unity folk.
Yes.
It's not intentional. But can we learn together? Can we grow together? Can we really, not be afraid of our past? This is history. This is past. I had, people came before me, and as she said, made a way for me to be there. But even in my being there, it was a bit challenging. And so I want to make sure that those who come behind me are coming into a great movement that, is just fabulous. That the world wants to be a part of the unity teachings and message. So. I don't know if that's my mission, but also I'm not being afraid to speak truth to power. I've been known to do that, and it's kind of not always been well received, but that's okay. Sometimes you have to be a voice crying out in the wilderness.
Yes.
So
yeah.
I'm willing to step in and step up.
Absolutely. Thank you.
So.
Thank you. So what kind of legacy do you hope to leave in your current roles as chairs? And you've already addressed that a little bit, but you may want to say some more. How do you feel you are shaping Unity's future?
I'll go two ways, maybe. The Johnny Coleman Airbnb should be ready early next year, which that will be like a crown. I will be off the board by then. But I know that I planted seeds to get it to that point. And first of all, so that there is always a marker of our history from whence we came. And there's a saying, if you don't know where you come from, you dare to repeat the mistakes of your past. And I think Unity was in danger of that. I really do. Because we've moved into a time now where, diversity is not just some, catchy little thing to be involved in. We live in a world that is changing drastically, and we cannot afford to continue to marginalize whole groups of people in a world that needs everybody to be on board, if for nothing else but to save the planet. That's number one. So, but we're moving into that time, and to sort of ignore that we were not where we needed to be progressing toward diversity and inclusion would have been the mistake, I believe, that would have put Unity back into the dark ages. And that would be such a shame, because these principles work. The second part is I serve on the board of the Parliament of the World's Religions. That's my other baby. And we're here this week at the Parliament of the World's Religions. And I gotta tell you, the first parliament I attended because I had read that Charles Fillmore attended the 1893 Parliament. And when I read that, and there was a parliament coming up, I'm like, I need to be there. It was the first time that Unity would be recognized by the parliament as New Thought. So New Thought is how the parliament receives all of the New Thought organizations. We're lumped together, if you will. Our philosophy is the same. So I have always had this thing that to first of all, attend the parliament. Then when I was asked to be on the board for the parliament, and then was elected to serve on the parliament board, I kind of felt like Charles Fillmore was kind of wanting me to do that. I mean, that's just how I feel about it. And so I serve on that board. I'm actually the secretary, but I'm also the chair of the Global Ethic document that was signed in 1993. But that is the Parliament's signature document. And it speaks to 5 core things that come from the teachings of all the major religions, saying that if we have these core principles in our teachings, we all believe in it, we could use these principles to change the world. And that excites my soul. So having unity very involved in the Parliament, I'm the first New Thought person to serve on the board of the Parliament of the World's Religions. So I kind of feel like me and Charles Fillmore are on a journey right here. And so even doing this interview while we're here this week in the General Assembly that I hosted yesterday, Jim Blake was one of the signers, also Michael Beckwith, but New Thought signers onto this global document. And in a ceremony we had, they went up and they signed, saying that we believe in nonviolence. We believe in a world where there's just economics for everybody. We believe in a world where we speak truth. It's important to speak truth, to use our words to inspire and not tear down and destroy. That we believe in equity for all genders and all gender identifications. And we believe in working to save the planet. We believe in loving this planet. We believe in caring for the planet. We believe in that. And so they were signers yesterday in a signing ceremony that we had here at the Parliament of the World's Religions. I gotta tell you, both of us being here, that's historic, but being here at the Parliament of the World's Religions in this day and time when the world needs harmony, they need the teachings, they need these principles that say, listen folks, we have the power to change the world. Let's do it.
Let's do it.
So I hope that wasn't too much, but
No.
this is passionate stuff I get to talk about.
I get another amen, sister. Amen. All I can say is yes, 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 yes. I feel like I've been to church. Yeah, well, see, when you hear the truth and you hear it spoken with such passion and commitment, you feel like you've gone to church because something opens up in you that says yes, yes, yes. So thank you for sharing that. I feel motivated and excited to be here. And the fact that New Thought, it's time we take our place on the global stage. We have so much to give and share. I encourage my people at my congregation to see themselves as light bearers. We're here to bear witness to the light, but to be the light as well, and bring these truth principles to the world. And we're not the only ones, because I'm glad to say that I think many religions and people of faith are coming to these universal principles that we hold so dear, but that they do as well, which makes it wonderful to be a part of this experience. This is my first time at the Parliament of World Religions, but I just know that we have a bright future. But here's what I want to say. Unity, when I came on board, it's a teaching of personal transformation first, that we go within and we work on ourselves and, change our own consciousness, change our own hearts and minds so that we can then bring that to the world. But I think in the past, unity has been a little bit too individualistic. And what is being called for now on the global stage is the collective, that there's a greater consciousness of which we are a part. So I'm hoping, which is why I founded my movement Stand Up for Humanity, is that I'm hoping that we, even as unity people, recognize it's not just about transforming my life. We have a greater mission and call. We are all, as you just said, the time is now, but we better transform this world and this earth if we are to be here, if we're to further life on the planet, and to also create a life for everyone that is, filled with health, happiness, hope, all the wonderful attributes of living a good, decent life. And so we have a role to play, and that is to make sure that our message is not only for our own selves to be transformed, but we have the ability to use their old phrase to create a world that works for all. And unity has to move beyond its own small sphere of serving itself into now, let's take our place on the global stage of life, and let's add our life to the cosmic collective consciousness.
Yes.
So that's what
beautiful.
that's the future I see.
Absolutely.
Wow, I'm inspired. And to finish up, I want us to look ahead, which again you've already started to do in answering my questions. But how do you hope future Unity leaders will continue your efforts and pick up where you left off? What would you most like to see done next?
Well, I think one of the things we have to remember, because I think we're at an inflection point, as I see it. Unity, like every other religion at this point in time, needs to make sure that we are relevant to the times. And with so much change, I realize that is a challenge. But we need to press ourselves. We need to ask ourselves the hard questions and give ourselves the difficult answers, because we have to stay relevant. And in order to stay relevant, you got to stay in touch. You can't stay relevant sitting in a building all by yourself, your little community, thinking up, great things to do, and you don't know what's going on in the world. You don't know what's going on outside. We've got to be a part of communities. We've got to be a part of collaboration with other denominations, with other people in the community. One of the exercises when I do board trainings and visit different churches, I say, tell me about the community beyond the doors of your church. Who lives in this neighborhood? Many times they don't know.
Right.
So they're a building sitting in a community. People don't know who they are because they don't know who the people are. That has to change. That has to change. There's a whole big world out here, and we have to be a part of it so that we can know what is ours to do in it. And so being relevant, being a part of, expanding our view of what community is, knocking down the walls of the church, not literally, but opening it up and getting out there and being a part of what does it take to if you're going to talk about being a world that works for all, you got to know what the all is about. So I pray that we continue to move in the direction of, expanding the consciousness of how we see ourselves and what we're willing to do to connect with other people. That's why the Parliament is such an excellent exercise in meeting people. You get to meet people from all over the world, from every different culture, and just get a chance to say, there's a whole big world out here, and Unity needs to be a part of that. So I hope that we will. I see us continuing in that vein.
Thank you.
Yeah. Well, for me, it's very similar to what Reverend Charline just said, but also I think there's a balance. I think we have a tendency in Unity, because we have such history with, our founders and the teachings of our founders, that we may get stuck in the past as opposed to taking those teachings, which, if they're true and have truth in them, they should be universal, and we should be able to transpose them in a way that is relevant. So I see those coming behind, not wanting to necessarily keep us, in the past as to how we did church and how those teachings were interpreted in the past. Can we bring them up into the future and into the relevancy of today? Which means, I'm a Fillmorian, so I love Fillmore's writings and teachings, but they are kind of difficult sometimes for certain people to really, if you take them straight, literally, out of the book. they need interpretation. They need to have someone that can refresh it and bring it into a relevant stage. And I know within our movements, for that might be fearful for some people. They may have the misunderstanding that we are casting aside our foundational teachings. And I'm saying, no, if there's truth there, the truth is universal and everlasting. But we can bring it. I don't have to say this and thou and these and them and use the language of the Bible, but I can take what's there and bring it into a relevant expression. And if we want to capture new souls and these young souls, they're not going to come to a building. When I was coming up, you went to church. Sunday was designed for you to go to church with your parents or whatever, and you listen to someone for an hour to tell you. Nowadays, these young folks are not necessarily willing to take that particular path, but they are equally as spiritual. They are hungering and thirsting for spirituality, for spiritual expression. But we've got to find a way that reaches them, that touches their hearts and souls. So we can't expect them to come to us. We must go where they are. There go my people, I must follow them, for I am their leader. So there's the young people out there, and so I need to figure out how can I connect with them. And so I just want to make sure that we have a balance in our movement, that if we think that ministry is going to go back to the way it was and that we should somehow find a way to bring more people in, that is not necessarily the way of the future. The future is, as Reverend Charline just said, how can we bring our teachings out into the world? That's the new frontier that we're seeking as Unity people. We used to say we're the best kept secret in town because at one point our teachings were very revolutionary. They were just startling to some folks. Now they are common teachings. I can turn on any TV show, a Baptist minister, whatever, giving unity principles. Yes. They throw a little devil in there or something else and then makes it okay. But they're basically our teachings. So what are we offering? What do we have? And when we get a young person that comes in, what is it that if we get them to click on our page or our website, what is it that we're going to offer that can allow them to feel that they have found a place? We're metaphysicians. The place is not your physical location. The place is where you are in your heart and mind. Can they find a place in these teachings that will enable them to go forth and be who they are? And we're going to have to, I've been in the movement a long time, over 50 years on this path. We're going to have to forge new, avenues. And it's not easy for me, but I recognize that's the path. That's the way of the future. So I'm going to jump right in and see where it leads. And I hope those coming behind me will also do the same.
Yeah.
So the unity, I'd love Unity to be here as a movement, from here to eternity.
Yes.
So.
Yes.
Well, thank you both very, very much. This has been a wonderful conversation. Appreciate your time and and your willingness to share your thoughts and experiences.
And thank you, Katy.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Yes, thank you.